Every once in a while, I like to do something that makes very little sense, but sounds fun and amusing. And that's exactly what I'm doing today. I'm gonna see what happens when we pair an RTX 4090 with a $47 CPU. And not just any 4090, this is a factory overclocked aftermarket card from Asus. It's super fast, and this is a puny little Sempron 3850 from AMD. Quad core, 4 threads, base clock of 1.3 gigahertz, no boost clock. There's no boost, it doesn't boost, it doesn't turbo, it's just 1.3 gigahertz. And we already know going into this that we're gonna be severely bottlenecked on the 4090. We're gonna see a fraction of the performance that you normally would with something like a high-end modern day CPU. But that's not the full story. I wanna know more. I wanna know, are we even gonna be able to play games? Are we gonna get 30 FPS, 60 FPS? What's gonna be the difference, if any, going from 1080 to 4K once we're more GPU bound? All of these questions and more will be answered on today's episode of Doing Stupid Crap Because We Can.
Before we continue, special thanks to Kioxia for sponsoring this video. Kioxia's latest NVMe SSDs offer improved performance, reliability, and capacity, like the XG8 series built for gamers and power users. The PCIe Gen 4 M.2 drive delivers sequential read and write speeds up to 7,000 and 5,800 megabytes a second, with up to a 4 terabyte capacity to store the ultimate game library. Kioxia's 5th generation BICS Flash 3D flash memory also makes the XG8 suitable for professional video production and applications requiring high-speed access to high-cap data, making it a prime choice for workstations and high-end PCs. The Kioxia CD8 series fulfills rigorous data center needs. Designed to NVMe 1.4 and PCIe Gen 5 specifications, the 2.5-inch drive features a single port design optimized for server-attached hyperscale and general server workloads, while 7th gen flash die failure protection maintains full reliability in the event of die failure. Experience leading performance with 7.2 gigabytes a second of maximum sequential throughput, while being backed by fail-safe technologies like power loss protection and end-to-end data protection. Designed for hyperscale data center environments, the XD7P series uses the E1.S form factor with breakthrough thermal and performance benefits, meeting the form factor, power, and thermal requirements of the OCP Data Center NVMe SSD v2.0 specification. The PCIe Gen 5 drive sustains optimal performance and reliability in demanding 24/7 data center environments and features up to twice the performance of the previous generation. For more info on Kioxia SSDs, check out the links in the description below.
Apart from the graphics card and CPU, we have this really lousy AM1B ITX motherboard from ASRock. It's mini ITX, so it's gonna look absolutely ridiculous with the card. I mean, just this is already stupid. 16 gigs of Corsair Vengeance LP DDR3 memory. Look at those nasty green PCBs. Remember when PCBs were this color? Ugh. 1866 megahertz. I don't even think this board supports that speed. I think it tops out at like 1600, which is just perfect for this video. Crappy little cooler for our CPU. That is awful. And then we've got an SSD, along with a 750 watt power supply. This is probably one of the few builds that you can get away with this low wattage for a 4090 because we've got what, a 25 watt, this is a 25 watt CPU. TDP is so low, 95% of all the power consumed by this system is gonna be the GPU alone. No need for a case today, we're just gonna do an open air setup that looks something like this. All right, here we go. So yeah, there is a motherboard here somewhere in this system. It's back there. I actually put a little kickstand, it's just like this piece of wood. Watch what happens when I take it out. It's like skinny kid and fat kid on a seesaw. But we're running right now. I just installed Windows, or Windows is in the process of installing. It's pretty much just booting up for the first time. And it took like 15 minutes to install Windows just because the processor is so slow. And also I just had this thought, like when we start gaming, I wonder if these fans will even ramp up. The GPU. There may not be enough load on the graphics card for the fans to even spin. I guess we'll find out. Bro, I launched Shadow of the Tomb Raider, right? It's been at this splash screen for literally 4 minutes. Like really, what can this chip actually do? That should be a follow-up video. I feel like this could barely run solitaire. All right, let's see how much longer it takes to just, you know, run the game. Oh my God, okay, wow, 5 minutes later. This does not bode well. What does this say? Okay, 30 frames per second. Hey, you know what? The menu is playable. The menu is super smooth right now, so maybe we're okay after all. Oh great, how long is it gonna take this to load now? All right, we're about 30 seconds in right now. Actually add 15 seconds to that because I started the stopwatch late. So we're about 45, 50 seconds in, almost a minute. Maybe we're running the game right now. It's just, you know, 1 frame per second. Oh, here we go. What was that? That was 2:34. Really almost 3 minutes to load into the game from the menu. And we are, oh my goodness. Can you guys see how bad this is? Bro, it's getting it's freezing up too. It's not just stuttering. Oh my God, do you see that tearing? This tearing is awful. What are we at right now? All right, we're getting around 30 frames per second, sometimes dipping below that, but it feels notably worse than that. Maybe it's just because of all the tearing and the stuttering. This is an absolute shit show. Definitely not playable. No one should game like this. Despite the 4090's insane price tag and scarce availability, the biggest thing holding it back right now is the CPU. I feel like this is about what I expected. Higher than, you know, 5 or 6 frames per second, but definitely not something that's ideal to play at. The GPU is only running at 25% utilization. Look at that, 25 to 30%. A lot of performance being left on the table. We're only consuming, the 4090 is only consuming 35 watts. Wow. Technically, we didn't even need a 750 watt unit for this. We could have gotten away with a 100 watt power supply easily. Jumping up anywhere between 600 and 900 megahertz on the core clock. Obviously, the CPU is at 100%. It's fighting for its life right now. Let's see what happens when we go to 4K. Does that alleviate our CPU whatsoever? Still just about as bad as it was. Still getting into the 30s. The gameplay and fluidity is still garbage. Oh, look! The GPU fan spun on. I think that's the first time they've done that. I forgot to keep an eye on them, but I think this is the first time they've actually spun up since we started gaming. Yeah, because the GPU temps have actually come down a ways. It was in the high 40s, low 50s, and now we're at 40C. A little bit more utilization, 36, 37, 39%. Wattage went up, 55 watts, let's go. What an animal. Our CPU is really at 17 degrees right now. I should just screenshot this without telling people what chip it is, and they'll be like, whoa, Kyle's using LN2. Oh yeah, that's some exotic cooling, baby. Okay, I think we get the gist of it. Do not pair a $1,600 graphics card with a $47 CPU. Things will not end well for you. We all knew that going into this, but now we have the data to actually show exactly what kind of frame rates we're getting and sort of how the system is behaving. It was actually really interesting seeing all these different stats. But next I want to do something that's a bit more relevant to the average user, and that is pairing this same graphics card, or actually we might revert back to a Founders Edition card, if I can find it. Here we go. 4090 FE, pairing that with a Ryzen 7 1700. This is first gen Ryzen, of course, and I feel like this chip, like a lot more people are likely to have something like this in their system versus this lousy Sempron. And so maybe this is somewhat useful or beneficial to those of you who have an older system like this, is what happens if you were, hypothetically, to change nothing else about your system except upgrading your graphics card to an RTX 4090. Would it even be worth it? And we'll compare those results of what this combo can achieve to the actual benchmarks that I did with the 4090 in my initial 4090 review. Let's do it. All right, so we got the next test bed set up, and this is on an Asus ROG Strix X370F gaming motherboard. On a side note, I was originally trying to use this motherboard, which is an Asus Prime B350 Plus, but I was getting blue screens left and right. It took me a minute to figure out that it was actually the board. So this is a bad board. An hour and a half later, I finally have this up and running. This was a huge pain in the ass, but I've already got Shadow of the Tomb Raider running. This is the benchmark run at 2560 by 1440, same exact settings that I used for my RTX 4090 review, and we'll compare those results shortly. But first I want to show you guys the Afterburner HUD and just how the GPU is behaving, because I can't actually run Afterburner and NVIDIA FrameView at the same time. FrameView being the tool that I use to capture frame rates and that sort of thing. But really quick, I want to show you guys this. So we're running at a very chilly 3940C, 44% utilization. I've seen this dip below 40%, going all the way up to maybe 45, 48, and then 2760. That's actually higher than I thought. Clock speed should be around 2850 if the 4090 has, you know, its legs to stretch out and it's got a good CPU paired with it. I feel like in some scenes it'll go a little bit lower. So like right now we're at just barely hitting 2000 megahertz. Very low frequency compared to what you usually see. And then wattage is just really measly. I was actually seeing this go up to maybe about 120 watts at the peak. But right here you can see that we're doing 84 watts from the wall right now, just on the GPU, making the 4090 look eco-friendly at this point. And then with frame rates, we're getting anywhere between 70 and 80 FPS, sometimes hitting just under 90, which is not too bad, very playable, but still way below what this thing was pulling out or what it was achieving when it was paired with a Ryzen 9 7950X. But now let's go ahead and do an actual benchmark run so we can compare it to my 4090 review results. Just ignore this because anytime I benchmark Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I don't benchmark all the scenes, I only benchmark the longest one at the very end. This is a culmination of all the various scenes, so you can just ignore that for now, but let's go ahead and see what we get with our next benchmark. Okay, the benchmarks are in, and at 2560 by 1440, we got an average frame rate of 100 FPS, roughly, and a 1% low of 64. Then we compare that to the 4090 review, and I paired the 4090 with again, Ryzen 9 7950X. At the same resolution, we got an average frame rate of 184 and a 1% of 75. So we went from 184 down to 100. So with this processor, the Ryzen 1700, we're getting a little bit more than half the performance out of our 4090. But that's still a ton of power that's just not being used at all. It's wasted money, essentially. So not a great investment, not a great upgrade if you've got a similar system as this one. At 4K, it's pretty much the same story. We didn't really dip much at all. We're at 98 frames per second on average and a 1% low of 61 versus 159 and 86. 159 to 98. So we're not losing as much performance at 4K as we were with the lower resolution at 1440p, because now the graphics card is being taxed more heavily, which allows our CPU to stretch its legs a little bit and actually help out in the process. So it's essentially the lesser of two evils. And as I've said before, I wouldn't recommend a 4090 unless you're gaming at 4K or higher resolutions. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's too powerful for anything below 4K in my opinion, and too expensive really. But even if you are gaming at that resolution, it simply doesn't make sense to pair this graphics card with a 4 or 5-year-old CPU. If you're gonna get the best of the best in one, you should get the best of the best in the other. Because in this situation, depending depending on what graphics card you're upgrading from, you may not even see any kind of performance uplift upgrading to an RTX 4090, which actually makes me curious. What previous gen graphics card would actually give us roughly these numbers? Or in other words, where does the bottleneck line lie for this particular CPU? Okie dokie, this is the first card we're gonna test. You guys guess what this is? Anybody know? Anybody know? It is an RTX 2080 Super. I figured that this would be a good place to start, partially because it was a pretty high-end card when it first came out, very much like the RTX 4090, but also because it came out around the same time as the Ryzen 7 1700. Actually, they released about 6 months apart, but that's still relatively close, and anyone who had a 1700, a lot of people who had a 1700 also had an RTX 2080 or 2080 Super or 2080 Ti in their system. So we're gonna start here, and also just for the record, total, again, another side note here, just look at how massive the aftermarket 4090, this aftermarket 4090 is compared to this 2080 Super. I mean, this people used to talk about how big the RTX 2080 series, the high-end 2080 series cards were. Man, these things are massive. Look at the heatsink on that thing. Not anymore. Looks like a freaking 1050 Ti compared to this thing. It's absolutely bananas. Those are the good old days, you know, when graphics cards were still compatible with, what are those things called? Cases. Okay, benchmarks have been run, and I've actually not seen the data yet. We're gonna take a look to see how close we got to the 4090 results with the 1700. Where are we at here? Average frame. Oh my God. Oh my great gentle Jeebus. Look at that. 98 for, I was right on the money, bro. I was only off by 2 frames. We were at 100. This was the original 1440p score. And then boom. And then 4K is a little bit further off, but still very close. I thought I was gonna have to test like 2 or 3 more cards after this, but I nailed it right on the first go. Moral of the story, kids, is if you have a Ryzen 1700 or a CPU that's comparable to it in performance, and you upgrade to an RTX 4090 and don't change anything else about your system, you would see 0 performance gain. Sorry, you'd be running 2 to 3 frames per second faster. Also, this is honestly a flex for anyone who still has an RTX 2080 Super, right? Because you could just tell people that your PC operates at RTX 4090 level performance, right? Just don't tell them what CPU you'd be pairing it with. This video has oddly enough turned into how to turn an RTX 4090 into an RTX 2080 Super. I feel like an alchemist. Obviously, I haven't done the testing myself, but based on the results from today, I would say that it's probably not worth getting an RTX 4090 unless you've got either the latest and greatest in terms of CPUs, which means, you know, 13th gen from Intel or Ryzen 7000 series, or the generation before that I would say is fine. Ryzen 5000 or 12th gen should be fine too. Anything older than that, it's like, what? No, it's gonna leave too much performance on the table, and you're just gonna be wasting money. The other takeaway here is just to see how far CPUs have come in terms of their gaming performance, right? Seeing how much faster a Ryzen 7950X is able to make this card run versus a Ryzen 1700 is absolutely phenomenal. I guess it's a good reminder that even though a lot of titles are still very heavily GPU bound, if you don't have a processor that can keep up with said graphics card, then there's a ton of performance that's just sitting on the bench, and it's taking some of your money along with it. If I could summarize this whole video in one simple phrase, it would be, don't skip leg day. You know, it's like a statement about having a balanced system, like the CPU, like the legs, and the, you know, forget it. Thank you guys for watching this video. Like it if you enjoyed it, subscribe for more tech content on the way, and I will see y'all in the next video.